go halfway across the country with someone. She needed her immunity to mean something.
See it round, kid. The fever, the rage.
Why did you say that name?
What do we owe the stories we consume? The adaptations and continuations we pay our money to experience? Are we just here to comprehend them, or to pick their logic apart? How much trust can we extend that they're in the best hands? What do they owe us? These individuals handed hundreds of team members and millions of dollars to go with complete creative freedom. Is that admission fee or base price a contract to deliver what we expect? Or is it a license to the author to take control away from us and offer the best work they can to our judgment? What role do our expectations have in the media we digest? How far over the line can a story go before we reject its choices and interpretations? How much of a right do we have to these characters with whom we choose to spend our time? How much do our critiques and discussion deepen the art and the context surrounding it? Well, that depends on the critique and the discussion. It might anger a lot of nerds to say, but there's not much of a right we have at all. Okay, so back when I was writing the first Nolan video, I started making a list of topics I could talk about in the future. And among those topics was going to be a video about The Last of Us Part 2. Not only had I recently played and been awed by it, but it had also generated an avalanche of both stellar praise and outright damnation among fans online. I wanted to add my voice to that conversation and discuss what I think the game and the team at Naughty Dog did especially well, and push back against some of the hate both were receiving. Now, there are a few reasons why I decided to shelve that idea, but one of the biggest was the more I thought about how I wanted to go about writing it, the more I realized that I wasn't writing about the game or the story, I was writing a response to all the loudest complaints I was seeing leveled at it. And that my problem wasn't actually with their specific complaints about Joel or Ellie or even Abby, but with how those complaints were phrased, and what that told me about how we engage with a story. And if I want to be really specific, with one word that shows up in nearly every single one of these complaints, about which I could never resist adding my unsolicited 2 cents. Let me make one thing clear. I believe all opinions concerning a piece of media are valid, and the more diverse the opinions can be, the richer I feel the conversation around that media can become. If you truly didn't like any of the games, movies, or TV shows I'm about to talk about, if you hated them and cursed their existence because they didn't entertain you as much as you hoped they would, and handed over your money on their promise to do so, if you were bored or confused or disappointed with the choices their creators made, if when the credits rolled, instead of feeling satisfied or whole or introspective or content with the character journeys you had just went on, you felt empty or unimpressed or hurt or even angry, then that's fine. Your opinions are valid, and so long as your outlet for them is healthy and respectful, so are your feelings. Ask around. I'm very familiar with unpopular or controversial opinions, especially when it comes to the most beloved IP in existence. Hell, I'm the guy who said out loud he doesn't like the goddamn Dark Knight, remember? I know how it feels to be told your opinion doesn't count because Rotten Tomatoes or the majority or both are empirical evidence that I am right and you are wrong. I know what it's like to be the one naysayer in the room for speaking honestly and be called a deliberate contrarian for your trouble. It sucks. It's lonely. It can be humiliating. That's not what I'm doing here. I'm not here to change anybody's mind into liking these stories that so many people have made very clear they despised. I'm here because too often when something big and flashy and ambitious swings for the fences and misses and becomes the internet's punching bag of the week, we see the same thing start to happen, that while I do honestly believe they come from good intentions, they kill meaningful discussion where it stands and makes it harder for everyone to enjoy the stories they care so much about. What am I talking about? Let's go back a few years and see if anything sounds familiar. It's 2016 and Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice is one of the worst reviewed movies of the year. For the briefest of moments, critics and audiences are united in the belief that it's an overlong, self-important, morose slog of a thing that can be tailed between its legs, afraid of the comic book genre's openly silly and idealistic mythos and ideologies at some points, and bear an outright contempt for its titular characters at others.
He has the power to wipe out the entire human race, and if we believe there's even a 1% chance that he is our enemy, we have to take it as an absolute certainty. And we have to destroy him.
We've seen what promises are worth. How many good guys are left? How many stayed that way?
We talk to each other. We act by the consent of the governed, sir.
But even louder than the punchline that Martha unintentionally became were the comic book zealots who shouted from the rooftops to the comment sections complaints like, among others, Batman shouldn't kill, Superman should smile, he shouldn't be a god, Lex should be older and bald and more like Jeff Bezos and less like Mark Zuckerberg. It's 2017 and Star Wars The Last Jedi has sparked more infighting than the American Civil War. Though critically praised for Rian Johnson's outside-the-box thinking when it came to the essence of Star Wars, the internet's been set on fire with disingenuous whining and thinly veiled racism and misogyny and vitriol for sure. But among all the trolls and the noise, every so often you could occasionally find a handful of honest comments from genuine fans using their inside voices, explaining why they firmly rejected Rian Johnson's vision, with whom it wasn't always a waste of time engaging. Complaints like, Luke should have been more optimistic, not a senile grouch. Snoke should have been somebody important and not die until the third movie. Holdo should have told Poe her plan from the start. Rey's parents should matter. It's 2020 and how dare this game make the choices it did. This is not what I signed up for. The absolute audacity of Neil Druckmann to kill such a fan-favorite character in his story's opening act, setting everything into motion. Who does he think he is? This isn't my Joel. This isn't Ellie. Who gives a flying fuck about Abby? This is bad writing. Joel shouldn't have died in the game's opening. If he was going to die, it should have been heroically at the end because that's what good writing is, and it's what he deserved. Joel shouldn't have trusted Abby so immediately. It shouldn't have tried to get me to care about Abby, and more than anything, the cherry on top of my Holy War Sunday against Neil Druckmann and Haley Gross and Laura Bailey and everyone who ever had anything to do with this game, Ellie should have killed Abby. That's why I stuck it out this long. That's The Last of Us I know and love, and that's certainly the one I paid $60 for. You know, the one that gives me everything I want in the manner that I want it. Where my morality is unchallenged by the character's motivations, where I play as a good, selfless human being, and nothing goes wrong for my favorite characters, ever. There are so many of these noisy instances of outrage all over media history. From The Last of Us killing Joel, to Rose not making room on the door and leaving Jack to freeze to death in the Arctic Ocean, to Abby ending up with Harper instead of Riley, to WandaVision failing to follow through on promises to the Marvel audience that it never made in the first place, and those are just the recent ones off the top of my head. And they always go the same way. This character should have done this. These writers shouldn't have done that. This story is wrong. This story is bad because it should have followed my logic and adhered to my values, not the artist's own. I can't say it any nicer than this. Get the word should out of this kind of criticism. Wipe it from the vocabulary. Cancel it. Banish it to the Shadow Realm. It's done. We can disagree with the creator's choices, and we can even wish that certain things just didn't happen the way they do. But to say that a complete and creatively untainted story should or shouldn't have gone a certain way is not criticism. That is not good criticism. I'm saying it's not criticism at all. It's not a word we see used by professional film reviewers because should isn't about the story. It's about you. Maybe I'm just wired differently, but I can't fathom the arrogance and ego that it would take to critique a piece of art with the assumption that I would understand the piece better than those who created it. Whatever the story is, whether it's a book or film or video game or TV series, it's the finished product of a million different and specific choices made to deepen and reinforce the story being told. What to do or say or include is just as important as what's not to, and nothing makes it into the cut or product we get to experience by accident. Whatever happens, it isn't done unilaterally, and everything is the product of thousands of hours of work by teams of people elevating every choice to its ideal form for consumption. Sometimes too many hours. All of which is to say that it's just factually wrong to look at a story and think what you believe should have happened never occurred to the creators and was ultimately decided against. If you didn't like or didn't buy into their story choices, then say it. But to speak or act like you understand a story or its characters better than a writer or creator who puts countless hours into every choice and development is just, I'm sorry, but vanity. How are we even expected to respond to a should critique? You know what, you're right. Actually, I disagree with my own input of what I think should have happened. What does any of that contribute? How does that help to understand the story that exists? Or do we even want to? All the fanfiction in the world isn't going to change a canonized story or the choices that made it the way it is. Or is the ideal and expected response to one of these claims just no response at all? Just a stunned silent admission of intellectual and creative superiority over dedicated professional creatives to an individual who definitely has neither. We don't own these characters, stories, or universes. We never did. It's not up to us to dictate what is or isn't an acceptable story for the canon, and it never will be. Some stories are all-time IP mantles that are passed from one fortunate creative visionary to the next for decades, where what we get to see is one interpretation or take on an idea. With Batman v Superman, Zack Snyder was daring enough to interrogate the characters and worlds he was handed, rather than carefully walk the line of what history and fans said he had to. By taking Batman and Superman and Lex Luthor and asking what can they never ever do, and then going one step further by following up with, but what if they did? Was it perfect? Absolutely not. But it's Zack Snyder's Batman and Superman, and nothing is off the table. For the first time, to make us actually question these characters' roles in our paranoid, media-driven, post-9/11 society. And it's all 100% Zack, and it doesn't give a damn what anyone says is or isn't Batman, and it has every bit of a right to be here as your Dark Knight movies. Other stories can be the next step in an ongoing saga carrying the torch of beloved characters and icons while moving an episodic story towards its conclusion. Unlike BVS, The Last Jedi isn't Rian Johnson's iteration of Luke, Leia, Rey, Finn, Poe, and Kylo Ren. He took all the ideas laid in front of him by J.J. Abrams and 40 years of Star Wars lore and brought them all where he felt they were logically destined to go. Where the story of the sequels had to go to be true to its old and new characters, and to give the ongoing decade-spanning Star Wars world both the story and the introspective look in the mirror it deserved. Where believing in mythic heroes and chosen ones and morality and these larger-than-life titans of legend is a pitfall that brings us to our greatest failures by trying to live up to them, but also an ideal that inspires others to hope and believe in a better future and in the difference one individual can make regardless of their origin, and how that's all that keeps some of us going. It's a smarter, more meaningful, and yeah, better Star Wars than anyone knew the series had the capacity to be, and Rian Johnson made the Star Wars movie only he could have made. There's a tangible universality to its characters and themes, and it's the last thing anyone expected, and the last thing some people wanted from the 8th movie in an ongoing saga, and it's not even what George Lucas would have done. But that doesn't mean it wasn't true to Star Wars, and it didn't mean there wasn't accuracy and authenticity in its characters' choices, even if the fans didn't want to hear it. The Last of Us is the creative brainchild of Neil Druckmann and Bruce Straley, and Part 2 is co-directed by Haley Gross. Despite the success and widespread adoration of the first game, the series has nothing to live up to but the vision of its creators. We all love Joel, but this story isn't about him. And yeah, my heart broke in half seeing that golf club come down too. But maybe that confusion and anger and grief and feeling that this game just started and I got to spend so little time with him was the point? And maybe the creators knew that's how we'd all feel because that's what grief is, and that's the inciting incident for this story about feelings more complicated than just good old-fashioned revenge? And maybe if I acknowledge these emotions and just trust the game because I know Naughty Dog is good at this shit, I'll understand what the method to their madness is when I make it to the end? But no one considered any of that, did they? We didn't get to have any meaningful conversation because the reply guides set their alerts to jump in on any comment thread that mentioned these stories with any sort of praise or positivity. How dare anyone not feel as incensed by these decisions as they are, right? How dare their creators defend their decisions, and how dare they not directly engage with those talking the loudest at them? In its own twisted way, it felt good to be so angry. Being angry meant they cared enough to complain. And if they complained loud enough, maybe their shoulds could be validated and decanonized because of that one time that they were.
Angry is good. angry gets shit done.
So why bother with the text as it's written when a loud enough fanbase can decide what is and isn't canon? Because your shoulds make us all dumber. Because to say what a story should or shouldn't be is to refuse to meet it on its own terms and shut out all the effort that was expended to make it that way. Because subversive and confrontational and challenging narratives make the whole medium better. To speculate wildly about what could or shouldn't have been is to ignorantly disregard all the choices that do make the story what it is, and more importantly, why. Forget about what you don't get and what you don't see and what the story isn't for a minute. What is it? What do you see? How is it presented? Why is it presented that way? And what does it tell you about the characters, themes, or stakes? Did Batman kill a metric fuckton of people? Okay, why? What did that tell us about this version of the character based on what we know up to this point? Is Luke a grouch, and are the mystery boxes of Force Awakens dead ends? What narrative purpose does that serve? What ideas and values does it convey? How does that tie into the themes being explored, and what does it tell us about how we think about Star Wars?
The greatest teacher, failure is. We are what they grow beyond.
Does Joel die in the opening act of the game? Do you have to play a whole 3 days as Abby running alongside Ellie's vengeance? How does that make you feel, and why does it make you feel that way? Consider that the creators knew the answer to that and sought to challenge those emotions within you. WandaVision didn't introduce the X-Men? Did it promise it was going to? Was that the story it was telling, or would that have taken away from its poignance and empathy when it comes to grief and trauma? Was there room for Jack to survive on that door? Would we have felt the human cost of such a historic tragedy if he did?
The script says Jack dies. He has to die. So maybe we screwed up and the board should have been a little tiny bit smaller, but the dude's going down.
Answer these questions and then take a hard look at your should complaint. Then ask if the story did play out by granting your wishes, would it have maintained its thematic or dramatic continuity? Would it still be an inspired work of creative vision, or just an unchallenging group-tested product made to satisfy and be consumed, absent of the very boldness that drew an audience to it in the first place? Is art made for the artist or the audience? I'm not here to say we have to love or stand by every single decision made, and I'm definitely not saying I'm completely innocent of making should cases either. Lord knows I have my complaints with a few left turns taken in a few different movies. But unless it's something as messy and unrealized as Game of Thrones, every single complaint I or someone on the internet can make undoubtedly has a drawn-out thought process behind it, explaining why it made it into the finished story the way that it is, and what that adds to it. If you can honestly answer all these questions and come out with the same surface-level, emotionally driven reading of these stories as to when you first consumed them, if you can examine any creatively complete piece of art with a desire for empathy and come out believing that you know these characters and ideas better than their creators, congratulations. Write your own and find the audience who appreciates your vision. Live in the canon of your choosing to your heart's content. From the bottom of my heart, if you want a Batman who never kills, and a Superman who smiles, a Joel who dies a hero, and a Luke who stands as a valiant protector of the galaxy, a Wanda who rendezvous with Professor X, and a Captain America who stays with the Avengers, or anything else, then you can. Go ahead, no one's stopping you. But when you say it's what should have happened, you flaunt your inability to understand and interpret media. Your preferred continuity romanticizing or translating the world or its characters has as much of a right to exist as Neil Druckmann or Ryan Johnson or Zack Snyder or any other creator's continuity does to challenge them. Understand that that should is not their story, not their values, not their canon, it's yours. It's not just lazy to judge them on restrictive and arbitrary rubrics of fidelity or accuracy rather than effectiveness. It's irrelevant. If a choice or an arc runs counterintuitive to how you believe it should have gone, maybe consider what the author is trying to convey and ask what you're missing. Examine the tone, theme, character arc, lore, internal logic, whatever. Consider that the author loves this IP as much as you do, or is at least as fascinated by it. Consider that they know what they're doing because they got millions of dollars to do it. And definitely acknowledge that your question and objection occurred to them before release and why they left it in anyway. On the other hand, Instead of dwelling on and imagining and wishing for that should, ask what larger underlying problem it reveals about the storytelling or character writing up to that point, and how the creator came up short of their own vision. That's conversation we can all have. That's criticism that improves the medium. When a story can be judged by its effectiveness rather than its logic or accuracy, they become so much easier to fall in love with. And isn't that what we all want all the time? Because the more we judge and condemn stories according to our preferences, values, and expectations rather than their own, the more we argue against what is with what should, then the less we encourage bold new stories driven by artistic creativity and intent, and the less we understand and appreciate the stories and properties we claim to love.